All right, hello everyone. My name is Daniel Bear and I'm an event facilitator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory and that the land on which we are gathered is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Aninawak, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, as well as the homeland of the Red River Métis. And additionally, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. And of course, we are gathered here to celebrate the launch of Renewal, Indigenous Perspectives on Land-Based Education in and Beyond the Classroom, edited by Christine Malott and Katya Ferguson Adamov. And thank you to Portage Main Press for publishing this book and making this evening a reality. And you're going to hear from the editors and some of the contributors in just a moment, but before I introduce our host, there's just a couple words that I have to say before we start. Following the in-conversation portion, and time permitted, there will be time for questions. So if you do have a question tonight, just raise your hand high enough for us to see, and then ask your question. And then our host, Dan, today will just repeat the question for those who are watching at home on the live stream. And then I'll be back, of course, at the very end, just to review how the signing procedure will go, because we're doing a little bit differently today. But for now, I have, of course, the pleasure of introducing tonight's host. Dan Henhock is an assistant professor at the Faculty of Kinesiology and Recreation Management at the University of Manitoba. His research interests revolve around Western conceptualizations of leisure and Indigenous ways of knowing and being. He is interested in the tensions between leisure, neocolonialism, decolonization, and issues of sustainability within recreation and leisure. Dan is Kenyan Kehaka. Kehaka, yeah, that's right. Sorry, thank you. From the Six Nations of the Grand River. So please join me in welcoming Dan Henhock.
No, thank you. Sego, hello. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to start with a couple words of Thanksgiving. Brian and I are both Ganyangahaga, or Mohawk people, and in our culture, we all start everything with a thanksgiving to all of our relations. Now, I won't go into the long recitation of the Thanksgiving address. That would take a while, and we only have an hour. But I just want to give that acknowledgement to all of our relations in the world, all those beings that give us their knowledge and provide us with their sustenance, our sustenance, to be able to survive and thrive in this world. A lot of Indigenous cultures start their gatherings this way, and I think as we're talking about renewal, one of the things that I know for myself and for Brian and many others is we want to make sure that tradition survives. And I want to just make note too, it's not a prayer, it's an acknowledgement of those beings that are living and that provide us with their knowledge and their love, and they give us the ability to survive, right? So it's an acknowledgement of them and also an acknowledgement of our responsibilities as what we would say Mohan, as Ongwe people, to take care of them as our relations. So thanks very much for that. I also want to acknowledge too that I am a visitor here. I moved here in 2018 already, and I feel like I'm still learning about the people here and learning about the cultures here. I'm very thankful to have met so many people that have helped me along my own journey of learning. Yeah, it's been fun, and hopefully many more years. So thank you, everyone, and welcome to all of you who have attended the launch this evening. It's great to see your faces. And hello to all of you on YouTube. Nice to not see your faces, but yeah, I hope you're out there. It's kind of having a bit of a COVID flashback here. So I'll just do a quick introduction of our panelists, and hopefully you can all hear me. I'll start with Brian and then work my way over. So Brian is Ganyangahaga as well, or Mohawk, right, from Ganyangahaga in Quebec. He's a professor in the Faculty of Kinesiology and Recreation Management, one of my colleagues at the University of Manitoba. And over the past 30 years, Brian has been a teacher, an interim principal in an Indigenous operated school, and as an educator in various university faculties over his long career. Christine Malat is Anishinaabe, an educator and curriculum developer from Winnipeg. She currently teaches high school at the University of Winnipeg Collegiate and is the associate publisher at Portage Main Press. And then we have Katya Ferguson. She is a settler educator and artist of Ukrainian and Russian ancestry from Winnipeg. Katya is also an arts-based researcher engaging with creative and critical methods to support place-based inquiries and deeper understandings of land-based issues, and she's committed to creating partnerships and supporting Indigenous resurgence. And then last but not least, we have Rihanna McKay-Morasti. She's Innu from Barren Lands First Nation, and she has a Master's of Architecture from the University of Manitoba. She is an architectural intern at Number 10 Architectural Group. She also works with One House Many Nations as a research assistant on First Nations housing developments, where her research focuses on reciprocity, Indigenous knowledge systems, and land-based pedagogy. So welcome to everyone on our panel. So I have a bunch of questions here that we're gonna have the panels answer. I'm gonna start with Christine and Katya, and Brian and Rihanna, feel free to jump in, but we'll start with Christine and Katya. So let's start. Tell us about how this book came to be. What was some of the history and the impetus, and perhaps some of the motivations to focus on the book on Indigenous land-based education?
Yeah, thank you for that introduction, Dan. This book was actually the series, is the Footbridge series. So this is Renewal is the second edition in the series. And it was really the brainchild of Gary Thomas Morse. So for those of you that don't know, he is an Indigenous editor from Kwakwaka'wakw territory and what we now know as British Columbia. And he asked me if I was interested in doing an Indigenous education book. And of course, I said yes, why not? And this would have been around 2019, 2020. I can't remember if it was before or during the pandemic. But he wanted to create something for educators to take theory and make it practical. And so I loved that idea. I want to say that maybe he was inspired by Red Rising magazine, because he specifically said that he wanted different types of mediums. So he wanted not just like personal essays, but also artwork and short stories and poetry. And so we have all of that in both books. And yeah, that was really the impetus for the whole series. It was called the Footbridge series because in his territory, I think the footbridge is like a really important symbol and object. And so we really ran with it. He was an editor for Portage Main Press at the time, and unfortunately, he went on and to do different things with other publishers, and so he didn't really get to see it through. But it was something that I was really interested in, because when I helped out with Red Rising magazine, that was something that I saw was missing, is that classroom connection. How can educators take these really big, sometimes complex ideas and make it practical and realistic for students in K-12 to learn about and to tackle? And so the first book in the series is Resurgence. For those of you that don't know, we had our book launch on Zoom during COVID for that one. And basically it was just open to any topic within the concept of resurgence. So it was a really fun process where we got to ask Indigenous professionals from many different territories to write or contribute to anything on the topic of resurgence. And so if you read the first book, you know that there are so many different concepts in here, from residential schools all the way to Indigenous architecture. And so after that, we were trying to think about, okay, we have a second book, we want to do this again. What theme should we have this time? And we really wanted to focus it on a particular theme. And we thought of land-based education. You know, it's something that educators are encouraged to incorporate in their classrooms, but as an Indigenous educator myself, it was something that I really struggle with. And so I wanted to personally learn more about Indigenous land-based education. And so that's really how the idea came to be. Is there anything that I'm missing you want to add on to that?
I think one thing that I'd like to share too is that Christine and I didn't know each other, and we are both bringing two different perspectives. And I think that we're bringing some of our experiences from a K-12 educational system. So I had more experience with younger years, and Christine has experience teaching high school. But we wanted a resource to support K-12, but also think beyond, and then also think about how do we support learning and supporting Indigenous resurgence and land-based practices and renewal for everybody. So beyond just teaching and within educational systems, but what do we have to learn, and really centering that. And so we tried to think about that footbridge the whole time. And I think that Rihanna's artwork really illustrates this footbridge really beautifully. And so we have Resurgence has the footbridge illustrated on the front, and then we continue that bridge, and we wanted to really highlight that idea of Hagglget footbridge, which is an image that comes in the back of Renewal, and that's what Gary shared with us initially about this work of building a bridge together, that we're crossing this bridge back and forth. This learning is recursive, and then we're all coming at this work from different perspectives and points of view, and different entry points. So we all have different things to share, different strengths, different challenges. And so we wanted this resource. We didn't go by grade level, which a lot of educational resources do, but we wanted to have an entry point for everybody. So we have scaffolded questions so that everyone can engage in the important ideas. We have connected concepts, which are for everybody, but these concepts are really the key parts that kind of glue things together. We also wanted to just support the arts and making sure we have multiple ways of knowing and being and doing, and making that really an important part throughout.
Sego, Skanagogo, Ryan Pugits. My name is Ryan. Siwakwego. Yeah, so like for me, like even being here, this, you know, we wonder after many years, you know, what have we kind of contributed, you know, to, you know, our disciplines and such. And, you know, often those doubts are there, but when you see your students, two of them were my students here, both, wow, sorry, I'm just having a bit of mind blank, you know, because I've had some illnesses lately, so in my mind, and so I've you know, it's been like this for about 5 months, and I can't get really much help, but I'm just saying, so if I'm hesitating a little bit, you know. Anyway, when you see them succeed, then, you know, that's my success. That means I've contributed something, you know. The fact, you know, that they had been, you know, part of my life, and I've been a part of their lives, you know, regardless of how much, it doesn't matter. You know, that's the purpose of being a teacher is you know, you teach, and then your students learn, and then they become the teachers. And this is what has happened here with these two, you know, wonderful students, former, you know, seeing them progress and in their own lives, you know. So I've been very fortunate in that way. I get down sometimes, you know, on academia, because like I said, you know, those questions are always there. You always ask yourself those questions as you're going through this process. You see professors come and go and they disappear, and all of a sudden they're not there anymore, and I'm going to be one of them at some point, you know. But you want to feel that you've at least, you know, made a mark somewhere. in somebody's life, and they, you know, like them asking me, even they don't have to, you know, I'm here at their kind of request in a sense. So, you know, I appreciate that, because that tells me something as well about myself and our relationship, you know, in the past. So Nyawa, thank you very much.
And I'd love to add actually that Dr. Rice was my very first Indigenous teacher at the University of Winnipeg. Was the first time that I ever had an Indigenous teacher. And so I remember one of our projects, actually our final projects in the education department, instead of writing an essay, amazing, we had to do a creative project. So we had to learn to do something, to make something from our culture. And I learned how to bead because of that project. So thank you for that. And on another note is Dr. Rice has also been doing this work since like the 90s, contributing to like Manitoba education, Indigenous education and such. So thank you. Thank you for being a part of this.
Yeah. Hang on. Yeah, Brian. I love that notion of Footbridge, and maybe this is a good segue into the second question, Christine. So you wrote in the introduction, there are many reasons as to why teachers and others might be motivated to read a book about Indigenous perspectives on land-based education. Like a desire for a deeper and more authentic experience in the classroom. Can you share some thoughts about what it is about land-based education that might provide more authentic experience in the classroom?
Yeah, I mean, and just again, from personal experience, I was born and raised here in Winnipeg. I went to public school my whole life. And I, you know, reflecting back on that experience, I never learned not only about Indigenous people, but about the land that we were on, you know, the history of the area. Of course, I went to school in like East Kildonan, but even thinking about students who went, you know, in this area to Grant Park and not learning about Roostertown and Métis history. And like, there's so much rich history right here where we are. And to think that for so long, students just had no idea about it. It's such a rich learning experience to be able to connect history to the present and where you are. And I think that is like just, you know, a reason in itself to incorporate land-based education into your teaching practice. And then also, there's so many gifts that we can learn from the natural environment. And so that's something that I'm excited to implement in my classroom more.
I think land-based education helps us to think outside the box, outside of the classroom setting. It's recursive, it's inclusive, it's relational. I think it helps us to breathe life into our practices. I think it helps us to nudge maybe out of our comfort zone. We learn a lot about ourselves, I think, in that process. I think it engages our mind, body, and spirit. And I think that sometimes educational settings don't allow for the all of those three to come together. And I think that kids respond really well to that. I think it makes sense for kids as the ways that they learn best. And I'm just thinking of the document Mama Tuisaman, and they talk about the wonder they're born with. And I think that land education can help kids achieve that, to see kids and everyone to be successful in a maybe new sort of way, and to find the potential within themselves. Yeah, I wondered about, and you mentioned the cover design. I just wondered if Rihanna would share a little bit about that. I know this is kind of going back to step one, but I just feel like it's so beautiful.
Sure. So Tansay explicación ask me as well, and just the casa de Bakamak and Tosin. As mentioned, I'm Rihanna. I'm from Barrenlands First Nation, and I had the wonderful opportunity to work with these two ladies on the cover art for both of these books. And I really want to also say like a thank you for them entrusting me in even the first one, because that was my first instance of designing anything for a book. I've done like chapters or whatever, but never like showcasing my artwork in such a way. And along the lines of our own personal experience of land, I grew up in northern Manitoba, where my land was my playground. That's how I built forts. I used to And I talk about it in sometimes in my writing of all the little experiences that I had when I was a child. And those really intimate experiences that I had up north with my grandpa, my grandma, and my cousins, where I just lived remotely. We didn't have any running water or electricity because we had our own cabins on islands on Reindeer Lake. And so that experience of being so ingrained in the landscape from where I am from, and then coming into Winnipeg, where it was completely the opposite of what I wanted to experience. And so my own experience with home really influenced also the book, the artwork in the book, really integrating how not only the vision of them and what they had for the Footbridge and the whole series, but including various elements such as the women, such as the weaving of the branches, that it's also the weaving of our intergenerational knowledge that we have within our families. And then moving on to the land-based, that one was a fun one because there's all these little things and details within it that are also very significant to me, such as the blueberries, the wolf, the moose, and also the fish and the turtle. And in the process of developing this artwork, there was also an aspect of, I was pregnant at the time with twins, and there was this notion of like, what am I passing on to them? And also the idea of future generations and the things that we create and the things that we write about. And that really like lit a fire underneath me of, and I included that into the design itself. And so I'm very proud of it.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a wonderful cover. It's beautiful. So Brian, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So the whole book, it provides wonderful discussions about bringing in Indigenous knowledges and land-based education into the classroom, or perhaps other outside the classroom. What are some of the teachings and or advice that you might offer to teachers who are interested in incorporating Indigenous knowledges and land-based education into their classrooms?
Yeah, just take chances, I think. Take chances of, being innovative, and just don't think you have to be kind of so structured in one way of doing things. When we talk about Indigenous knowledges and stuff, we're all from really oral traditions and not written traditions. And so we use a lot of different things like wampum belts and pipes and all kinds of different stuff, to communicate. Even fires, the idea of a fire it's a real thing. A smoke, you went into before you went into any Haudenosaunee camp, you had to light a fire about a mile away or so, and they would see the smoke and they would send their runners over to see if you're coming in peace or not. And so there were so many different types of communications. I mean, sign language out here in the prairies, a lot of people don't know that, that sign language was very significant. There's a people called the gros ventre, the big bellies. The French called them gros ventre. And what people don't know is the reason why they're called gros ventre is because they used to wave their hand over their bellies. And what their real name is the waterfall people. And so how, those things get kind of miscommunicated and such, by not understanding what, people are saying. See, we struggle a lot, with languages and stuff as well, because most of our languages weren't noun based. They were expressive of things. And so when we talk about, let's say, a wolf, we may say a waho or miangan, but it means it makes a path. And so we've forgotten a lot of those nuances because the written word takes away all of that. We start emphasizing nouns and such, and then we lose the nuances of our languages and things. So part of land-based is really renewing and reestablishing those ideas in a sense. And the only way you can really do that is, I mean, you have to go out there and you have to see it, you have to experience it. What happened with me was I came through a childhood of doubt, and I got into, as anybody reads my little chapter, into trouble and all kinds of different things because I didn't have any direction. And then in 1981, when I got out of that, I started to find direction. And part of that direction was through Indigenous ceremony, elders, culture, and all of these things. And I had the opportunity, in my dissertation, my PhD dissertation, to walk through my territory, which was about 700 miles. And so, I had always wondered because when I was, Christina was there in education, I was trying to think of new ways of how to teach. And I kind of felt, like I had been boxed. Like I would say, everybody do a 10-page paper and I'd get 30 on residential schools because nobody else knew what to write or do. But what I found out with teachers, for instance, is, or future teachers, is everybody has something that they can do, whether it's art, poetry, music, and why not have them contribute, to those types of learnings and opportunities to be able to become the teachers themselves in different ways. So when land-based came about, and it was being offered at University of Manitoba, nobody really knew what it was because it's kind of a new thing, and everybody's got their own ideas and such. And I thought, well, I have an idea. I did my walk. I want to be innovative and everything else. So is there a way of doing land-based, let's say even in an urban environment, because we don't have the money and plus the way our schedules are structured, we can't go, 200 miles up north or something, because you can't do that during the week. But what happened with me is because I do a lot of physical exercise type of things, I just jog to different places here in the city where they're, and I'd learn about those places where there are, Indigenous people's experiences and such, over the years. And that would be my exercise in a sense. I'd go to those places and I thought about it, it all came about, I'll go briefly here just to say, it all came about because a friend of mine, Mario Kiuto, who's in the Bear Clan, made a challenge. Well, part of this is the reason. He made a challenge, and that was to do 25 push-ups for 3 weeks or something it was. Well, I could do 100 push-ups. So, I didn't want to do 25 push-ups. So I figured, I can do some fast walking, jogging, or whatever to all of these places. And then I'd learn about them. And I'd even come here and I'd look at books, not necessarily Indigenous books, but historical books. Because for me, finding one story in a 300-page book that is relevant to what I do about this place, is worth the 300 pages. The 290 pages, let's say, I don't read. If I find that one story, and that's how I go about my learning and such. And I've had a lot of good experiences here, Sundancing and Uwipi ceremonies and sweat lodges with a lot of people. Tobasanik Wabkin, who's dad, remember taking a sweat with him years ago. Calvin Pompana, was an elder here, and he lived right next to me, and he says, "You want to Sundance, Brian?" And so these are experiences. And when I was in Native Studies years ago, a lot of it was about colonialism, but really not about experiences. Maybe when you were younger and such, with your families, but what do we experience today here? And so that became very important to me. And that's what I try and share with my students is I want them to see this place in a different way. I don't want them to just see it through the lens of their eyes, but I want them to experience it. And through the things that I know, that I can contribute to expand that knowledge base for them so that they feel like this is more like their home, that they're not a part of this, that they're not simply here existing, but, very, very important for them to feel that, you know, I live in Winnipeg and my history doesn't start, you know, when I came here. It started a long, long time before. And so that's what I try and impart to my students, you know, and that's what I want teachers to, once they learn from me, then they become the teachers, you know, of those places. They know where the places are now, you know, so that really helps them too. So anyway, that's it. Thanks.
Yeah, well, Brian. If anyone is interested in seeing Brian do his walks or do his push-ups in the dead of winter, check out YouTube. He's on there.
Yeah, that's right.
Does anyone like to add to that? The question was, you know, what advice might you offer to teachers who are interested in incorporating land-based education?
Yeah, my advice would be to include parents and community as much as possible. You know, I think we would be surprised to know how much expertise our students' parents have. And so bringing them into that experience is really great. And then also just, you can never be too prepared. So one thing that was really important to me to include in the book was almost like a checklist of how to do this. And so at the very beginning of the book, we go through all the different considerations that one might have when implementing land-based education, Indigenous land-based education. So those would be my 2 pieces of advice.
I think seek the guidance of Indigenous knowledge keepers and elders, and think locally. The idea of learning about a place's name, like Winnipeg. I just finished a dissertation just on Winnipeg, Manitoba, and thinking through that and what does that mean. And so bringing in Indigenous languages to understand the relationship to land, or like in Winnipeg, we are understanding this as a watershed, a place of resurgence, as an ethic, and we're connected to many water systems. And so that's part of you know, making meaning of a place. So it's land-based, but it kind of can become an entry point into something bigger. Another thing is to just make it part of your routine too. I think with Brian, we walked a lot. But I think that it's just like making that part of your everyday routine, and then you notice different things. And then you might start feeling more comfortable to start learning about different things that you're noticing. You might start asking questions about what you're seeing and your local environment. So think kind of locally and involve Indigenous languages, and then as many people and experts and expertise as you can.
I think mine is on the lines of what Katya just said, but I would say start with place and start with locality. Because once you look at the place, it all has different outcomes based on where you are and what land that you sit on. Once you look at the place, you look at the nation, therefore you understand language, you understand practices, teachings, ceremony, and even buildings. And so the place is the foundation for a lot of Indigenous nations and how they live their life.
Great, thank you. You can keep the mic because I have another question. I think it kind of builds on what you just said. So, you know, we center the land in our relations when it comes to the ideas about land-based education. But I'm wondering, how have our relations informed or influenced some of your thinking about land-based education in educational spaces and settings?
Yeah, as mentioned, my understanding of relationship started at home, and it kind of grew into this understanding of Cree natural law. And so I use the teaching of Wakotuin and how I walk about this life and the work that I do. And Wakotuin translates to everything is related and everything has a relationship. And that it is not just from human to human, but it's human to plants, plants to animals, and us as well. And so there's a circle of life. And this notion of Wakotuin, and if you understand place, and it's a conversation I have a lot in just specifically in architecture, whereas how do you develop a relationship with the land and if it wasn't something that you grew up in? For me, it's something that is ingrained in me. It's like what I grew up, it's what I've always known, but how do you introduce that into someone that has always lived in an urban space? And I think it's all about how you approach and having a different way of thinking. For myself, we I always think of the land as living. I see it as a person. I see it as something that is worth fighting for. And so once you realize that it's not just us and them, it's us together, you have a different approach of how you walk about this earth and the work that you do. And it always leads to care, compassion, and sensitivity. And so that's what I always see that being incorporated within land-based education and educational spaces is having that different way of thinking. And to do that is going from this rigidity to this openness, because you can't talk about land without feeling it, without smelling it, without understanding it. And so it's going on those walks, it's having this interconnection with even like the trees. And it sounds so different, but for myself, I could just sit under a tree and just listen to it for an hour, even if I wanted to. And it's all about this calmness and this not staying inside and realizing that there's this other life that's out there that has a lot to learn from.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else want to add to that?
Add a little bit to that. I think it's beautiful what you're sharing. I think that part of this book has been about building relationships, and we have had the privilege and the gift of working with so many contributors, and to receive them into our emails, and it's been just amazing to learn every like every week we're working on it, but it's been a really beautiful learning process. It's helped me personally to connect to learning and knowledge that my dad had shared with me. My dad passed away a few years ago, but when reading Peter Thomas's work in here, he talks about relationship with the sturgeon, and the sturgeon passing knowledge to the turtle. And so I feel like that he was an ichthyologist, or he was trained as a zoologist, and he always had this understanding of relationships between animals and honoring the animals. And he kind of gave me some of that and helped me to see things. But it's only through this process that some of that learning made sense to me. And so the image of Peter Thomas's sturgeon and turtle kind of activated that. And I started to think about the knowledge that I was learning in relationship to my dad and now this project, but then also my own children and how to continue that work. So it's prompted going out, and like we kayaked, my son Eli and I kayaked to see pictographs and petroglyphs, and it's kind of become part of a new relationship that we have with land together, and a renewal of things that I had from the past, but yeah, it's been very, very helpful to renew these practices and hopefully pass them on to the future.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's been both a professional and a very personal journey. Like I said, as someone who grew up in the city, I've always felt like a disconnection from land. But, you know, so many people talk about that. We have, you know, Nikki Furland here, if you wanna raise your hand. I'm gonna pick on all the contributors that are in the room. But, you know, in your piece, you talk about that, and you really named it for me, and it's something that I always felt, but I didn't know how to describe that disconnection. But of course, you know, you talk about how that's a myth, right? How this idea of cities being for settler spaces, but actually everywhere that you are is Indigenous land. And so that for me was really powerful. And it's something that definitely related to my own experiences. You know, talking about, and even sharing with my students, actually a few months ago, I teach in a very diverse class. Most of the students in my class weren't born in Canada. And so I tell them this every year. I tell the same lesson to different groups every year about the land, and how I think I made a point about was it that the grass that we see, like lawn grass, is not indigenous grass. It's not native to the land, right? It was brought here from Europe. It's like lawn turf grass, whatever. And I got my students to think about like what does the actual like real land look like here in the prairies? And they were just mind blown this year. I've done this like 5 years in a row, and no one says anything. No one really cares. But this year, the class was like just in awe. Like, what do you mean the grass isn't native? It's not, how it's supposed to look here. And it led to, a really funny conversation and a really deep conversation about colonialism and how that was done on purpose, right? Trying to disconnect Indigenous people from their land so that it's no longer recognizable, so that we don't have words in the language for these things. We don't have teachings. We don't have that knowledge. And so, yeah, this has both been, a very professional journey and personal. I find myself, speaking of relationality and relatability, like asking my aunties about our, home community of Swan Lake First Nation. Of course, I didn't grow up there, but I visited there every summer. And, just the other day, my auntie was telling me a story about how my grandpa, great-grandpa, had influence in shaping the land and ensuring that the land wasn't sold back to the crown. And so this is very much an ongoing journey for me, for sure. I feel like I'm at like the beginning of my journey into land-based education.
Yeah, so also, like I worked at the University of Winnipeg for 18 years, 3 years in religious studies, 15 years in education. But I didn't know that that area was actually the preparation grounds for the bison hunts. And so there's an old photograph of a Métis cart and some Cree, Nakota, Anishinaabe, Saulteaux, Ojibwe, same people, preparing basically to go out west. And where they would go is they would go to Charleswood, because Charleswood has the passage. And the passage is, you'll see a little sign of the passage. Just trying to think of Guy, and then you have, what's after Guy Street, the connection to Guy, just trying to remember it. But anyway, it's in Charleswood, and it crosses the Assiniboine River. It's a little park there, Berkshire Road. And that was where the most shallowest part of the Assiniboine River was. So that's where the bison herds would pass through. So they would go out towards the passage to start hunting. Louis Riel's grandparents used to camp right at the Charleswood golf course, and he would set up a little hut there. And so it was part of the preparations, basically, to go out there and wait for the bison to come, and you have then your food for the year coming in and such. Another story about the bison here too is McDermott Street was actually the main bison trail, and it went through Central Park all the way down to the Assiniboine River. And so you have all of these little stories, that are part of this city that most of us really don't know about. We don't know about, most of us, Marianne Good Curtin, living on Newman Street in Wolseley in the 1860s. And she wanted to regenerate the city, or the burgeoning town, if you want to say it. And she planted thousands and thousands of elms throughout the city of Winnipeg. And one of the reasons why we have these giant elms is because she had, it was something that she wanted to do. And basically we call her the tree lady. Of course, anybody knows the Wolseley elm story, near Newman Street on Wolseley, what happened in the 1960s, one of the trees. Unfortunately, the tree was in the middle of the road, and developers decided they wanted to destroy the Wolseley elm because they didn't think it was appropriate to have a tree in the middle of a street. And in 1960 or so, the women of Wolseley all gathered together to protect the tree. And then one night somebody put dynamite in it and blew up the Wolseley elm, part of our history and our stories. But there's stories all throughout this history. There's a burial mound in St. James. Sometimes I'll walk with my students there, nobody knows about. I've tried to talk to archaeologists about it and everything, and everybody's so silent about it. I guess they're afraid or or whatever, you know, that it'll be exposed, but, you know, there's no protection for it. We had several burial mounds. There was one right near the Forks, yeah, right by the Assiniboine River. Assiniboine actually is Nakota people. They're Siouan people. The Cree and the Anishinaabe called them Assiniboine, basically, you know, as a name. Some people say it's like the people who boil the rocks, but I think Powin, Assinipowan sounds more like spirit rocks, you know. And so anyway, we've had these burial mounds. We've got so much history in this city that people, you know, hopefully will have the opportunity to discover. And then, you know, that's part of what I try and do, is I try and get my students out to those places. And even the University of Winnipeg right there. I mean, even more contemporary stories, you know, like about even the Blue Bombers Stadium being right there across from the legislature at one time. Terrible team, 3-10, 1949. They find an Indigenous quarterback named Jack Jacobs from Oklahoma, Muskogee, full Muskogee. And there's no First Nations here because they're not allowed to live here. But they hire him, and he brings the team to 10-3, 10 wins, 3 losses the next year. And for the next 4 years, they're basically fighting Edmonton for the Grey Cup. And they become so popular that they move to Polo Park, and they call it the house that Jack built. So many people don't know those stories that are here, you know, and so that's the kind of things that, you know, why I appreciate Winnipeg so much, because I know, because I lived in Sudbury, I worked in Native Studies in Sudbury. I grew up around Montreal in that area, and even Ganawagis across the river. Nobody comes much to Montreal. Same with Oka, Ganassadagi, it's the same thing. You know, they're places on their own in a sense. But this is an Indigenous city, you know, built really fundamentally by Indigenous people, the foundations of it by Indigenous people, Métis First Nations, that evolved into what it is. Sometimes not in the best way, but regardless, it's part of all of all these histories are part of who we are here today, you know, and, you know, it just really, you know, really makes me happy to be able to contribute to the things that I know and I've learned from others, and even my own research and everything else, you know, to be able to pass that on, to have a better understanding of where we live. This is the Sace, actually, this is the Sace family's property right here. We have a young guy who works at the University of Manitoba, and he said, oh, I just went over to, I graduated over at Grant Park High School. And he says his name is Sace. And he didn't know this was his family's land right here, you know? So yeah, there's just a lot, you know, and I you know, and it's like Christine said, it's about this continuous learning. We don't stop, we find new stories. That's the beauty of it, you know, just find that one special story. It doesn't even sometimes have to be Indigenous. I love the story of Charles Thorsten and his story about how Snow White came to be. Out of the Weevil Cafe on Sargent Street. Falls in love. She's 20, he's 40. It doesn't work out. He goes down to California, gets hired by Disney, and he puts the face of Christine Solvabador is the face of Snow White in the 1930 cartoon. You know, it's just stories like that. It's amazing. So thank you.
You know what, Brian? If I learned something new from Brian every time I hear him talk. And if you ever have a chance to sit down and actually listen to his stories and learn from him, I highly recommend it. He said to me one afternoon, he said, yeah, you want to go find one of the burial mounds? And it turned into a 2-3 hour adventure when it probably could have taken us maybe 20 minutes. But it was fun, and I learned a lot, and it was, you know, I will always remember that, and always, you know, it means so much to me, Brian, with you sharing your knowledge with myself and everyone here. So thank you.
Dan, I wonder if we should do questions from the audience.
Yeah, we could do questions. Can I ask one more question, which I think is important for the book? Yeah. So you wrote that renewal can be defined as a process of reestablishing or replenishing relationships, which may include connections between humans and non-humans and more than human elements. What are your thoughts on this idea of renewal, indigenous knowledges and educational approaches in this moment of climate crisis?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think it's more important than ever to get students thinking about the land and how we can protect the land and how much we rely on the land. So that's absolutely huge. We have Brett Houston here today. You want to raise your hand? Brett, in his piece, he talked about the water. And so he contributed artwork and poems about an ode to the water. And so I thought that was really beautiful and a great entryway into getting students to think about how important the land is. Right, we all rely on the water to survive, and it's something that we should protect. And poetry and artwork is such an easy entryway for even the youngest of students. Yeah, so I would start with that. Do you want to add something?
I'll just say one quote from Marie Baptiste. I think she talks about living our way to a new type of thinking. And I think that land-based education helps us to do that.
Yeah.
I'll also add that young people and how we are bringing them up is also very important. And changing that, as I mentioned, that thought process of how we approach things. And I always come from a place of architecture where obviously the built environment is one of those contributing factors to the climate crisis. And how are we instilling not only this care, that compassion, that sensitivity from a very young age? And that all starts with education and how we are uplifting and teaching. Not only, you don't have to come from it from a place of destruction that is currently happening. You can shift it and rethink the way how we're teaching these young people, and always, like I mentioned, starting with place and that care and compassion. And I think that is very important in this time, because we need to start having a generation that isn't here to be part of that destruction.
Great, thank you very much. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, Brian's got one more.
Yeah, so I was just gonna say, so in the summer I camp out with the students at the University of Manitoba grounds, in the Point grounds where the agricultural lands are. Just to say, the agricultural lands used to be at Shiloh military base before, where Shiloh base is now was moved over to University of Manitoba. Well, I wake up my students about 5 in the morning. And all we do is we just sit there quietly and we wait for the sun to come up. And one morning, just before the sun came up, the mist came first. So we were on the little roadway beside where we were camping. Everybody's just standing there, and the mist comes up. And all of a sudden, inside the mist, you see the coyotes, the deer, and the animals coming out. And they were watching us, and they weren't harming each other, but we could see them through the mist as they were seeing us. And so it was just a really beautiful moment for everybody to experience, to see the coyotes and everything else just in the mist, hiding from us, and just looking at us, just waiting for that sun to come up. And that's what I do, because we do a lot of sunrise ceremonies, and I don't want to criticize, but we don't really wait for the sun to come up. We often burn tobacco and things, and oh, here's the day. No, you gotta wait for the sun to come up, and you have to watch it come up. That's part of the process, eh? That's what gives us life. That's what warms the mother's body. In our Sky Woman stories, it's elder brother, the sun, it's Sky Woman. It's, she lands on the back of the turtle. There's a whole long story about this. But what it is they bring the first life, they birth the first life, which comes from the bodies, and that's the plant. From the body of, once the muskrat goes down and gets the dirt and puts it on top of the back of the turtle, that begins the process of life. So our stories are all filled with nature teachings, and so nature is a big component as well. It's not just history, it's culture. I have a pipe, it's 200 years old, it comes from the fur trade, it's a Mohawk pipe. And I'll use it at certain times. Specifically, I don't use it all the time, but I'll use it at certain times, such as maybe a ceremony like that or so. So, you know, there's different components, but the most important component of this is the physicality. We're suffering from all kinds of disease, diabetes and everything else. And our elders and all the people before us, they were healthy. And they didn't, you know, they didn't have motorboats, they didn't have ATVs or anything else, they walked. And so when I look at our walks, even here in the city, I think about all of the Indigenous people going to different places, to whether it was to hunt, to trap, or whatever, you know, walking, you know, and getting that physical exercise that we all need. Going sometimes 20, 30 miles in the winter on snowshoes, you know. So I take my students, we don't do that, but we do go to Fort White, and I make them climb up Bison Butte there, you know, because I want them to experience, you know, a little hardship when they're going up there on the snowshoes, because it's the first time, eh? So, you know, we try and do those types of things. So I have those different components, you know, that I offer, and it's an evolving thing too. Now we've got, you know, a canoe part, you know, that we do, and we didn't have that in the beginning, so everything's kind of changing as things go, but it's always evolving.
Yeah, Brian, thank you very much.
And before we finish off here, I just want to acknowledge a few people in the audience. I said Nikki Ferland already. We have Brett Hewson. We also have Shirley Wanchuk in the front row. I don't know if you want to give a wave. Shirley contributed to the book as well. And she revamped her schools or her division's home ecology program. And so students in Louis Riel School Division learn about Indigenous land-based education in the topics of build, hunt, plant, and harvest. So she talks about and teaches about traditional family units, clothing, food, nutrition, and geography. So that's really cool. And I'm not sure if Riel Carrier is in the audience, but Riel's piece is all about listen, right? This really simple yet profound activity, just listening. And then of course, Dan is a contributor as well. And his piece talks about leisure, rethinking our leisure time, and how does that connect to land-based education and resurgence and renewal. So yeah, thank you everyone for being here.
Yeah,
I think we're going to open it up to questions.
Yeah, we have time for a burning question and maybe one other small one. So if you want to ask your question, stand up and say it, and I'll repeat it as best I can, also for those on YouTube. Use my professor's voice to say, what questions do you have? Going once, going twice? Okay. Well, thank you very much to everyone. Thank you for such a wonderful book, and thank you for a great panel. Please stick around and say hello, get a book, get it signed, and thank you. Oh.
Hi there. I just wanted to make a comment because I wanted to tell you how easy it is to do land-based education. And I want to encourage you to, no matter what you teach, if it's adults, little kids, preschool, all you have to do is take them outside. Recognize the sun. We're in the daytime. We're not at the nighttime where the stars and the moon is up. But I've seen some really good land-based education with stars being hung on sheets. And the kids come underneath the sheets with flashlights to see what the stars are. It's all about how your imagination is. And don't be shy or feel guilt or shame that you can't do it. You can do it. It's not hard. Pick a friend to try with, try it, laugh about your mistakes, and then keep going. And if you need a framework to hang it up on, I'll offer you this. Our ancestors at the last ice age predicted we would go through more ice ages. And so they left writings on stone for us. And the stone writings were 4 axes. The axes look like they've got the whole head, but some of them are missing the handle part. So if you're at the different types of places where there's petroglyphs and you see 4 axes, that's the one that they left for this teaching. We need to teach our children, all over, the ones that are not from here, the ones that come to live here with us, and our children, how to, in this order, because this is following the seasons, how to plant, how to build, how to harvest, and how to hunt. If you can do any of those, one little small task, we're really proud of you. Thank you for looking after our kids' sin.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. All right, well, thank you very much. That concludes our panel for this evening, and have a safe journey home. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. That was an amazing panel. We are going to move along to the signing portion, which, like I mentioned, we're going to do a little bit differently today. We're actually going to do it right here at the panel. In just a moment, I'm going to just come by and move some of the chairs and some of the cameras out of the way too, just to make some extra space and make it a little bit more accessible for everybody here. But again, let's give another big round of applause to all of you being here. For those who are online, again, our hosts today, and then of course to all of our panelists, Christine Malott, Katya Ferguson Adamov, Dr. Brian Rice, and Rihanna McKay-Bernstein. Thank you.